In the African context specifically, not every organization is ready to turn on the end state, all bells and whistles agentic solutions.
Sure.
So how we've thought about positioning our platform is, how do we allow customers to get value today from where they're at in terms of their businesses, their processes, and the realities they find themselves in, whether that's financially or whether that's situationally or whether that's from a market perspective, a regulatory perspective. How do we help those businesses get maximum value on their path to becoming an agentic enterprise?
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of ITWeb TV. My name is Chris Treasure, and joining me in the studio today I have Linda Saunders. Linda is the South African country manager and the senior director of solutions engineering at Salesforce. So Linda, the AI discussion, it's fair to say that it dominates boardroom level discussion, but it permeates every other aspect of business and functions of business. And there's many layers to that discussion. Perhaps we can start with the concept of AI is the new work standard. What is your take on that?
Yeah, AI as a new work standard. I mean, if we kind of unpack that a little, you think about every individual right now, whether your workplace allows you to or not, you're probably not owning up to using AI, but you're probably using AI in some shape or form. So we're seeing this sort of pervasive use of it, potentially in a commercial sense or potentially in an enterprise sense. But I think what we've realized is that people see a value case there. They're seeing there's certain things that they've been able to do that help them be more efficient or help them in pressure points. And so that pervasive use of it, I think, has been driving a lot of the sort of narrative around AI.
Yes.
And then, of course, I mean, that's probably from an individual perspective. But if you think about it from an enterprise perspective, we're always looking for opportunities to scale, to de-risk our organizations, and to really help our commercial models. And so, you know, there's this sort of culmination of all of these things that I think have come together to say, if you as an organization are not thinking about AI, are you going to be relevant? And that's not only relevant in the commercial sense to your customers, but are you relevant in terms of the employees you're trying to hire? Will you be keen to join an organization that doesn't offer you the ability to maximize your potential?
Right. So there's a lot of implications from an AI use point of view. So I attended the Salesforce media engagement session earlier this week, and I recall the parable that you used to explain or shed light on thinking around AI, which was about the Chinese farmer. So for our viewers, for the benefit of our viewers, can you just explain that a little bit more, elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think for me, we've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about, you know, what does AI mean? What is happening in the AI space? And I guess the parable for me, and I'll reference it a little bit, it was really in response to this sort of very binary or polarizing thinking that I was seeing as a response to what is or isn't AI. You know, it was all this, it's really, really good or it's really, really bad, and that pendulum swing. And so the parable is really, we call it the maybe story. And it's basically a bunch of events happen to a farmer, and his neighbors are either elated or they are devastated in equal measure as and when these events happen. And every time the farmer responds, his concept is, well, you know, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. And so, you know, it was a reminder to everyone in the room that, you know, all of these things have, let's call it a yin, a yang. They have a positive and a negative. And a lot of the time it's around the intentionality with which we use these tools that drive those outcomes.
I think that's very important as well from a grounding point of view, because there's so much hype associated with AI. To come to that level and say, look, it can be good, can be bad. It depends on what you're using it for and who's using it, right? Which is, I think, is very important. Because it leads me to my next question, which is about AI adoption. we hear various statistics about the failure rate of new AI initiatives. IDC, the most recent one I came across was an IDC stat, which is puts it at about 80% failure of new initiatives, newly launched AI initiatives, which is quite a high percentage. So what are you hearing from customers in South Africa? What are operators, businesses, organizations doing right? What are they doing wrong when it comes to AI?
I mean, it's a complex subject, but I think we do have some experience that we sometimes forget, and that, for organizations, we've been going through this concept of digital transformation and trying to extract value out of technology for a long time. And so some of the old sort of hurdles that we never overcame in those iterations, I think, are still applicable. There's the change management component. Is there a value case for your organization to move? There's some of those typical things. But I think also a lot of it is around how do we construct our relationships? I think there's a definite need for us to evolve our relationships when we think about the traditional relationship of a supplier, sort of, you're a vendor, we contract you for function and for price. That old model is not serving us particularly well, because I think a shared value case, because of how quickly the technology is evolving, how quickly the technology moves, contracting and having a 3-year outlook and then coming back and having a review, this is not relevant today. And so this concept of partnership and having a vested interest in a shared business value across both your vendors as well as your customers, and also including your customers' customers, because, ultimately, if you're not driving value for your customers, it's really a moot point.
Yeah.
But I think what I've seen, certainly in the African context, and maybe globally, because I think this is fair to say, AI was the shiny toy. And so we pulled all our investment into AI.
Right.
And if you think about the construct, I think we were very quick to put a roof on the house, but we forgot about the foundations and the walls and the purpose of the rooms that we're building.
Yes.
And so, sometimes we rush to invest, we rush to do something without taking that moment to understand what will make this successful from the ground up, basically.
Right. And the partnership ecosystem that you were referring to earlier this week as well, it's very interesting. There's a lot of emphasis on, I guess it's a two-way sort of benefit, symbiotic kind of relationship that you have. How do you think Salesforce's channel ecosystem possibly differs to other vendors when it comes to engagement with your customers, with your partners?
It was an interesting observation that a customer made sort of about 2 weeks ago. He said it was really difficult to discern who was the vendor, like as in who was the Salesforce employee and who was the partner. And I think it's something to do with how we founded the company and the ethos that we founded the company on. So one is that we always understood that we needed to create value in our communities. And so when you have a subscription-based model as a company, it means that if you're not creating value for your communities and for the people who consume your services, then they very quickly leave your service. And so I think that combination of the responsibility that's ingrained in us as an organization, and we share that very much with our partners. We're selective about our partners. We want to make sure that we have a values alignment and that we have outcomes alignments with our partners. So we work almost sort of side by side. It's difficult to see the daylight between us in many cases, but I think it's driven a lot by that. And that value creation for us is our survival. And so it's what's measured is what's managed.
Right. And the way you manage the AI speaks to the rest of the way you are dealing with your own ecosystem and developing it and building it up. So the other thing is, I mentioned hype earlier on around AI, and I think it's hard to have a discussion about AI without acknowledging the fact that there is a lot of hype around it. A lot of it is industry fueled. We can say that safely. But one thing that I also remember from your discussion earlier this week is understanding what AI is and understanding what AI isn't. And I suppose that's, on a sort of basic level, that's a fairly straightforward question, but actually it's not that straightforward, because there's a lot of things that are coming into the mix that are confusing people.
Yeah.
And we're not only talking about businesses within the confines of technology. We're talking about pretty much all businesses, all sectors, all industries. What is Salesforce's role in educating the market?
I think for us, it's something we take very seriously, and you met Ursula, and so
Yes.
Ursula Fear really looks after our talent strategy across the African continent, and you hear how passionately she thinks about creating value chains, creating value for people in our communities, and so that is definitely one component of probably a very complex sort of approach to how we think about creating value. But I think for us, it's also been about, in the African context specifically, not every organization is ready to turn on the end state, all bells and whistles, agentic solutions.
Sure.
So how we've thought about positioning our platform is, how do we allow customers to get value today from where they're at, in terms of their businesses, their processes, and the realities they find themselves in, whether that's financially or whether that's situationally or whether that's from a market perspective, a regulatory perspective. How do we help those businesses get maximum value on their path to becoming an agentic enterprise? And we've been incredibly deliberate about sort of how we've constructed the technology. We've been very deliberate about how we go to market and how we make sure that our customers are growing in that capability with every new iteration of capability that they're basically putting through on the platform.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's an element of flexibility there, right? I mean, your typical customer base and your channel partner base are, they have an acumen in terms of literacy, digital literacy, understanding of the technology, but not every business that approaches you is going to have that same level of maturity. So how do you adapt your strategy to suit the kind of customer that's coming to you?
And our sales cycle is probably a little different, but for us, what we really look to do is we want to deeply understand the business where it's at today. And that often requires some investment from our customers and also some trust.
Right.
Because the more context we have around where you are in your organization and how you need to achieve things and what are your objectives and your challenges, I think the more complete the solution is that we can put forward for a discussion.
Right.
And it is a discussion because prioritization is also a really big part of this journey. And it's also why we, when we look at our platform, we try to simplify the discussion.
Right.
And the discussion needs to simplify in a couple of ways. So we think, what is your system of context? What are we doing in terms of providing context for your organization? So that's really that data discussion, the management, the making sure it's compliant. How do we make sure that it's connected? How do we make sure that it can be activated? And that system of context, we start unpacking with our customers.
Okay.
Obviously, context without somewhere to have work done also becomes a little bit irrelevant.
Sure.
And we talk, that data activation happens at that work layer.
Yeah.
And our systems of work is our bread and butter. It's sort of where we started. Our name was Salesforce because we started with sales. We've obviously grown that, expanded that portfolios extensively, and we're now sales, service, marketing, commerce, ITSM, HR. We've expanded that capability to just, really cover a lot more in that systems of work area. But then on top of that, we then start looking at systems of agency. And when I say agency, I think for AI specifically, we need to start thinking about AI as an agentic solution is state of the art, does the work for you. We do have opportunities to step that back. And so it may just be that we need to generate something in the flow of work for an individual and not take on the task and do it autonomously.
Right.
And then maybe we just need to give you some views on predication. And so it's sometimes, I like to joke, if you're going to hang a picture, you don't need the sledgehammer to make the hole for the... So, it's really, and this is the work, right? Yeah. And then obviously on top of that, It's all about engagement, because all of these things now need some way to engage.
Yeah.
And so it's as simple as that, but obviously the complexity lies in the objectives.
Sure. And I think you've explained very well. It goes back to one of the things that you also mentioned, which was AI has to be fit for purpose, right? You have to have a good, solid, clear reason as to why you're bringing this technology on board. And perhaps, I don't know, it's a suggestion. Some of these issues that companies are experiencing when they take on AI is because they're rushing for the technology without having a use case in mind. Is that fair?
I would say that they typically have a use case. And I think, in some of instances, the pilots that have potentially not yielded the results that people were hoping for. I do think there is an element of learning that happens in an organization that also can't really be measured, but I think is invaluable. Certainly when we see use cases, and I'll give you a wonderful example, is we really think about, in the beginning it was about the use cases we thought would add value. We also weren't really sure how they would generate value. And I think we've also had a great evolution of how businesses are starting to understand where the technology really plays well.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of uptake in terms of in the service space, customer service space. Traditionally, and this is the use case I'll reference for you, is we have a use case where we have a group of clients, in-state clients of our customer, that were really wanting to transact or find out about a financial product after hours. So this was a product that was aimed at people who were typically working either shift work or they were working a full day, 8 to 5, and the call center closed. And they weren't able to have those conversations in their office environment because a financial conversation with an agent is a difficult thing to have in a work environment where your colleagues are listening in.
Sure.
And so with Agentforce, they were able to still have those Q&As and answer those questions and give those people access to knowledge after hours without having to bring in an additional shift. And so they were empowered to have all the information so that the transactional conversation now didn't also include all of this sensitive detail in a workplace. So it's just thinking outside of the box. But maybe second to that is, I want to say transparency is probably really important.
Okay.
We go to the nth degree to also challenge our customers. So when we look at an agentic use case, we want to say, what is the value you think you can derive? And we help our customers to work through what actions, how do those actions translate into value, so that we don't start without a very clear value case, but also understanding the cost case. And so that gives us at least an ability to say yay or nay.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's important as well, given the kind of environment that we've got around AI in South Africa. I remember during the session there was mention of couple of challenges: cost, infrastructure, skills availability. But we can't really take the conversation further without acknowledging the fact that regulation has a place, especially at this juncture of AI's development in South Africa. And we know what happened with the AI policy introduced quite recently. What is your view on how regulators will be able to actually come closer to industry, support them in the right way they should be, and then, but it's a give and take, and there must be a compliance as well. I don't know if that's an oversimplification of it, but what do you think? What do you think of that?
I mean, yes, it's a super complex topic, and I think, as an organization, we deeply respect the intent with which each country is approaching, their regulation around whether it be AI or data sovereignty, etc. And so, we're always very open to work in partnership with all the various stakeholders, because there are a multitude of parties that are interested in these outcomes. I think for us, we've been very fortunate, certainly in this market, and it is a ever-evolving landscape, and so it should be, if we consider that the technology is moving quite quickly.
Sure.
But I think the conversations we've been able to have and what we've been able to achieve has been, it's not that we are either giving up some of our rights or our responsibilities, or we're also not giving up maybe the innovation side of things. So
Right.
I think there is an ability to have both, but it is very much centered around ensuring those discussions are about making sure that we're driving the right outcomes and working backwards from there. So, if we're talking about AI as an example, protecting citizens from, AI abuse,
Yeah.
holding organizations accountable alone without giving people the right education and framework to understand what is the potential risk of them using a commercial model. I think there is definitely a need from an education perspective to empower people to also own the responsibility they have in terms of these engagements with technology.
Sure.
And I think that combined with the right discussions and the right sentiment around outcomes, I think will get us to a place where we can have both.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think in sort of closing, one of the things I remember you mentioning is the fact that AI is not going anywhere. It's here. It's out of the box. You can't put it back into the box. It's going to have an impact on the kind of future we are building for future generations. And you mentioned the question, what are you supposed to tell your children? And I think this is hugely relevant because AI is touching every one of us. It's not just the confines of technical IT, board level, C-level. It's everyone. What is your outlook going forward? What advice would you give to any company, any size operation within any sector or industry?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a difference in maturity, and I understand that, and nature of what they're doing. But you understand where I'm coming from.
100%.
There's got to be sort of some kind of advice for someone who comes to you and says, Linda, what should we do about this AI?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so fortunate, I suppose, when you work in technology, every parent wants to know, so what is this going to mean for my kids? It's probably one of the top one questions I get, every time we have a dinner conversation, or I'm stuck in a queue waiting for a plane.
Yes.
So certainly I appreciate that. But there are a couple of ways to think about this. I think from an African perspective, because this is where we live and this is where our children are.
Yes.
Are we not so fortunate to have such a large digitally native population?
Right.
I mean, this is an anomaly. This is not the reality for most places in the world.
Yeah.
And so, how do we help our kids to navigate, I guess, any technology tool or life? I think one is, are we giving our kids the right values so that they can discern where things feel right and feel wrong?
Yes.
Are there safe spaces for them to have conversations about, I don't feel comfortable, or I would like guidance without judgment?
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I also think that if we think about empowering children, and you hear about this all the time. We grew up in a world potentially where you got a job in a big corporate, and the more stable and the longer you had a term of service, this meant that you were successful in your job.
Right.
And I think we're seeing a very big shift in terms of value and work. We're seeing a different gig economy, gig work.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much of this will shape what a career path looks like in the future.
Sure.
Will
that's
we
a good
have an
point.
organization that consists of a multitude of people or contacts that has a problem to solve? And these people will be able to go, I'm keen to solve this problem today, and I'm going to contract for that problem.
Sure.
This could be a different way of working. And so,
100%, yeah.
this combined with how do we empower our kids to be change relevant? And the best way to do that is to encourage a multitude of micro skills, micro learning. I think, this concept that you have a career path and that this is basically all you need to do to get going on your career path.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that that's relevant anymore. So it's about flexibility. It's also about appreciating that they're actually the architects of the future of work.
Yeah.
And they will
100%.
eventually dictate that. And so how do we empower them to do that in a way that, helps them have meaningful lives, I think is probably our biggest responsibility.
Oh, that's very interesting, very strong, strong way to end our conversation. There's so many other avenues of discussion. I'm sure we could spend hours talking about this, but we'll have to park it here for now. But I want to say thank you very much, Linda, for being with us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and keep watching this space. There's more to come.